Christ is born.
Glorify him.
Today we hear in the gospel about the massacre of the innocents and the flight into Egypt. And I brought my Egyptian icon of the flight into Egypt here. All of a sudden, because Joseph listens to God, because he's obedient to the warning he receives in a dream, he flees by night, and the Blessed Mother and our infant Lord are kept safe in this foreign land. Reminds me a little bit of shortly after Grace was born. We too had to flee because turns out that the house we were living next door to in Canada was a grow-up, and the lights caught fire, and the wooden house that was only sort of a foot away from ours went up in flames. There was almost nothing left of it the morning afterwards. This was in the middle of January in Winnipeg, and the temperature was at least minus 40. So there's me, Amanda, and a newborn baby huddled inside the back of a cop car. So maybe that was my little way of relating to this sudden fleeing in the middle of the night. The prayers of the church for today tell us some interesting things about this horrible event. The wicked seeker of the hidden treasure today slew the innocent children. Rachel could not be comforted when she saw the unjust slayings and the untimely death. She cried out bitterly, "They are happy, for they are in the bosom of Abraham." Goes on to say that they are now residents of the kingdom on high, and they reprove Herod's foolishness forever. Also says that, "O Lord, you justly illumined the untroubled souls of these innocents, whom you settled in the dwellings of those who live forever." It says also, "May the infants who were slain for Christ rejoice." This massacre of the innocents raises us the difficult question of where is God when bad things happen to good or innocent people? You know, we like to think that God, in his omniscience and omnipotence and almighty power, is going to always put a stop to evil. And sometimes he does. Jesus escaped. But our Byzantine tradition tells us that up to 14,000 two-year-old boys and younger did not escape. Now, a learned priest suggests that maybe given the actual size of Bethlehem and its environment in those days, it was unlikely to have been more than 100, and that we're just exaggerating when we say 14,000. But of course, even one slain infant is one slain infant too many. And when we think about God's power and God's knowledge, we might think, well, if we look ahead in history, Jewish history, outside of the Bible, Jewish history tells us that King Herod, this evil monster, came to a truly suitably sticky end. Basically, if I understand it right, his insides burst, ruptured, and he was eaten from within by maggots and worms. I'm not the slightest bit sorry for him. And I'm sure you're not. But I find myself wondering, well, wouldn't it have been much better if that had happened to him before he slaughtered all the innocents? Wouldn't it have been better if Rachel had never had to mourn for her children in the first place? What kind of comfort is it going to be to Rachel, to all those mothers in Bethlehem? Well, it's all right. This fulfills a prophecy of Jeremiah. Don't worry about it. Rachel will not be comforted, it said. And so it makes us face up to the reality in this fallen, sinful, and sometimes terrible world that evil triumphs, that children are slaughtered. Where is God when that happens? You know, just as people wondered where was God on 9/11, there's several possible answers to that question. But we're still faced with the ultimate fact that God allowed 9/11 to happen, at least in the form that it did happen. God allowed the massacre of the infants to happen, even though baby Jesus was kept safe. There's also a tradition which tells us that Nathanael was kept safe. And I don't think we have it on this icon of the Nativity, but I read that there are some icons of the Nativity that have a baby Nathanael hiding under a fig tree from Herod's soldiers. And that illumines the passage in the Gospel when Jesus meets Nathanael. He says, before Philip called you, I saw you when you were under the fig tree. An ancient tradition, Egyptian tradition, tells us that Nathanael was one of the lucky infants in Bethlehem who escaped the massacre because his mum hid him under a fig tree. I wonder how many parents in Bethlehem that evening had the bright idea from God. Maybe we should go take the baby and go visit my mother-in-law in Caesarea. Nah, I don't want to visit my mother-in-law. No, really, maybe I should take the baby and go visit my mother-in-law. People say that in 9/11, so many people heard God telling them, either run as the buildings were about to collapse, or don't get on that plane. I wonder how many people heard, and because of the inconvenience, who wants to rebook a different flight, or who really wants to go visit the mother-in-law in Caesarea, and so they stayed where they were, and we know the rest. I remember reflecting that God was certainly with those passengers on Flight 93 who fought and, which seems, overcame the hijackers and thereby prevented more death and destruction. I'm sure God would absolutely have been with any member of Herod's bodyguard who on that terrible night said to himself, look, enough. It might well be a suicide mission, but I am going to seize an opportunity and I am going to kill this evil monster and take him out. God would have been with that person. We're allowed to use force when it's the only way to protect innocent life. But bad things do happen to good people. Sometimes there are mothers and fathers and many others who, in the words of the prophet, are afflicted and not comforted. Rachel is not comforted. Of course you're not comforted if your baby boy has been ruthlessly murdered. But the Lord, through the prophet Isaiah, says this. This is Isaiah chapter 54. O you afflicted one, tossed with tempest and not comforted. Behold, I will lay your stones with colourful gems and lay your foundations with sapphires. I will make your pinnacles of rubies, your gates of crystal, and all your walls of precious stones. That is an image we see from the book of Revelation. That is an image of the New Jerusalem, which is described as being built out of gemstones, precious stones. And actually, I understand that if you look at what those stones are and visualize the description, what you see is a rainbow. It goes through the colors of the gemstone match the colors of the rainbow. all around this city of the Lord. So what I understand the Lord is saying through that is, yes, in this life, there are many people who unfortunately will not be comforted. But God will lay their foundation in the kingdom of heaven. That, thank God, this life is not the end. Thank God that there is recompense. Yes, for the evil monsters like Herod who come to the sticky end that they deserve, both now and hereafter. But also there is recompense for those who suffer needlessly. No parent should ever have to bury their children. And yet we know, unfortunately, that from time to time, for whatever reasons, it happens. So, very often, we forget that God does treat his sons and daughters in a preferential way. Very often, we do have that divine protection. We do have that warning in a dream to go and go now. We do hear that voice saying, don't get on this ship, don't get on that plane. Thank God. And Isaiah again says, and he's really speaking to Jesus, but of course, in Jesus, he's speaking to you and he's speaking to me. What applies to Jesus, safety, also applies to you and to me. And the Lord said this to Israel through Isaiah. I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I gave Egypt for your ransom, Ethiopia and Sheba in your place. For you are precious in my sight. You have been honored, and I have loved you. Therefore, I will give men for you and give people for your life. In other words, sometimes the Lord does say to his chosen people, that's you and me, I will give all these other people because I have come to save you. I will let, as the psalm says, 1,000 fall at your right and 10,000 fall at your side, because I have come to save and protect you, and you are my son, you are my daughter, you are part of my plan. We can also say with the psalmist in Psalm 27, though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may break out against me, I will yet be confident. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be confident when there's an army at your door waiting to kill you. But if God protects you, if God tells you to be confident, you have nothing at all to worry about. The Psalms tell us that God will hide us in his secret place. God will hide us in the cleft of the rock if needs be. God will hide us when Herod, the devil, or his agents are coming to get us. We can trust in that. We can hold on to that. We can rely on that. We can, as the psalm says, be confident when people are dying all around us. We do know that bad things happen in this life, and that when there is no comfort in this life, God absolutely promises comfort in the next. He says he will wipe away every tear from our eyes.